So we've had a lot of people asking, what are some of the best cruisers that you can get for under $2,500? So go ahead and hit us with some, Josh.
Yeah, so just to clarify, these are going to be probably the top 5 best motorcycle cruisers that you can get. We're going to leave out all the sport bikes. We're going to leave out dual sports, that sort of thing. We're specifically talking about cruiser motorcycles. So got the first one on the list if you're ready.
I'm ready.
Okay, first one is going to be the Yamaha V-Star 650.
Okay.
It was the same bike for about 10 years. Man, this is a classic Yamaha motorcycle cruiser. It just has the looks of just the old style, what you think of in your mind when you think of a classic cruiser. It's got a low seat height. You don't have to be particularly tall to enjoy it. Great overall motorcycle.
Awesome. Great. What do you particularly like about the XPS 650 that kind of stands out amongst other cruiser bikes of that class?
Yeah, there's not a ton that necessarily stands out. It's just the whole package. You could pick this up as your very first motorcycle, and it's not too big. It's not too small. It makes plenty of power. You can go highway speeds without feeling like the engine's revved out to oblivion. It's just a great overall motorcycle, fairly reliable. The parts are dirt cheap. And it's also quite customizable. There's a lot of guys out here, they turn them into little bobbers, little bar hopper kind of things. It's a great bike to modify because it's not sacred. They made about 2.7 billion of them. So you're not gonna destroy anything sacred if you go to, modify it yourself, start cutting it up.
There you go.
Yep.
Okay, so you said it's a great all-around bike. Is there anything that you kind of need to know about it before you go buy it? Anything you should be concerned about with this?
Yeah, the one thing that you do want to look out for is the final drive on these tend to wear out. The splines fail, and there's all sorts of debates on why this is all over the Yamaha forums. But the bottom line is, if you got a noise coming from the rear end, look into it and make sure it's not the final drive. If it is, expect to pay about $400 alone just for the part. That's not including labor. That's not including seals, gaskets. That's not including anything else. So just bear that in mind. You want to look out, make sure the final drive's not making any funky noise if you go to pick one up.
Great. You said there was a ton of these XPS 650s made, yep. And are there any kind of variations to them? Are there any particular ones that you recommend, maybe a particular year?
Yeah, I don't have a particular recommendation on a year, but they did make the V-Star 650 Classic and the V-Star 650 Custom. I recommend the Custom model. It has a smaller front and rear fenders, little bit of a lower seat height, and then it also has forward controls and a slightly larger front wheel. It just looks more masculine. It looks a little bit more muscular, I think. So if you want something that stands out, maybe just a little bit more than the traditional classic model, I would recommend checking out the Custom. It's a great looking bike.
Sweet. And what do you think your next bike?
Okay, so V-Star 650 is going to be a great one. I'd probably look at VTX 1300.
Okay.
Now you might have to look a little bit harder to find one in this price range, but I've seen well-running examples anywhere from $1,700. A lot of people post them up for $4,000 or $5,000, but man, that sweet spot between $2,500 and $3,000, you're going to be able to find a good example for that money.
So with the VTX 1300, what are some of the things that you really think stand out with this bike? Something that maybe a little bit of a step up from the XPS 650 we just talked about?
That's fair. Yeah. So obviously, it's more than twice the displacement. It is literally twice the displacement, actually, math. It's going to make more power. It is still a 5-speed, which does come up a little bit short, but so is the 650. So it is what it is. Great seating height, great looks. I do think that the overall stance is a little bit more imposing than something like a 650. However, if you're a little bit of a smaller person, the VTX might feel like just a bit too large of a bike if you're somewhat new to riding. It's not that a shorter or smaller person couldn't handle it by any means, but if you're new to riding, and I presume you are if you're looking for, $2,000, $2,500 bike, you want to make sure you have something in your hands that you feel comfortable in and riding.
Right, right. So you think maybe if you're new to riding, maybe start with the XPS 650, or do you think you'll get a hang of it pretty quick if you went straight to the VTX?
Well, see, that's what's so great about the V-Star 650 is if you picked one up, it could really last you a long time. You're not immediately going to feel like an upgrades in the future. If you enjoy the styling more of a 1300, maybe you would go from a 650 to that Honda VTX 1300. But I think you could easily start on either one. Neither one makes too much power.
With the V-Star 650, you said that you should kind of go the custom route. Is there another style or year that you would go for the VTX 1300?
Yeah, so they made a handful of variations with the 1300. They made an S model, an R model. The R stood for retro, and then the S kind of stood for spoked, but they were basically the same bike. The S just had spoke wheels, and the R had the mag wheels. But the model that I would look for is actually the C model, and it has a smaller front fender, smaller rear fender, just all around a better looking bike. They typically can be had for the same amount of money as an S or an R. They all look great. They're all going to be pretty reliable. But I personally just think the C is the better looking bike. It also has forward controls on it, which you may prefer just depending on what riding position you find to be most comfortable.
With these two past bikes, the V-Star 650 and then the VTX 1300, you mentioned on the C model that it's got a smaller front fender, smaller rear fender.
Yep.
Why do you kind of lean that way? Just the looks of it?
Just looks, man. It's just looks. Yeah, that's all it is, man. Just looks.
And with this VTX 1300, is there anything that you should kind of be on the lookout for? Anything you want to be aware of?
Yeah. So for whatever reason, it seems like the fuel tanks tend to rust a little bit more quickly than some other bikes that I've had. And the fuel tanks are also quite expensive. To find a clean example that's not damaged, that doesn't have any rust in it, they're pretty pricey. So if you find one, you want to make sure the tank is not damaged, and you want to make sure that it doesn't have any rust in it. Doesn't necessarily rule it out, but you want to be aware of that. If you've never repaired rust in a tank, it's not always just the simplest basic, hey, I'm going to repair my motorcycle for the first time task to do. You want to have a little bit more experience under your belt before you go repairing a fuel tank. And so for that reason, if you're picking one up for the first time, if you're not necessarily the guy who's going to work on his own motorcycles all the time, I would try to find an example with no damage in the tank. And then you want to make sure it has no rust in the tank as well.
Got it. And you mentioned that the gas tank is, for whatever reason, particularly expensive for this.
Mm-hmm.
What about the other parts? Are they kind of following that same
trend? Yeah. No, actually, this is again, another one of those bikes. And this is why I love it. This is why I recommend it, because parts are dirt cheap. There's a huge aftermarket following as well. Lots of aftermarket accessories and different things you can buy, and even the OEM stuff, new, used parts are very reasonably priced.
Okay, that's sweet. And let's go ahead and go on to our third motorcycle.
Let's go with the Kawasaki. We're gonna go with the VN900.
Okay.
VN900. Again, depending on where exactly you are in the country, this might be stretching the $2,500 just a bit, but if you can push it, it is well worth it. It sounds absolutely phenomenal, especially for, a smaller displacement bike. It sounds great. It looks great. And, very comfortable, and I find it to be much more maneuverable than say like a VTX 1300. So this would be a reason, if feeling like you're in control, and if you're new to riding, if that's something that's important to you, I would probably recommend the VN900 over the VTX 1300.
Great. And to that point, which I couldn't speak to the specifics as much as you, but we did a video a while back with a Vantenheim's exhaust on it, and just looking at the bike, it was beautiful. The aesthetics of it, the size, like it all just kind of felt like a happy in between. Yeah. Especially as we just went from XPS 650 VTX 1300, and now we're in the 900 range.
Yeah.
I wanted to just point out that it was just a beautiful size bike for the style of bike.
It is. And you mentioned that Vance and Hines exhaust. That's one thing about that bike in particular. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a Vance and Hines, but I find that just about any aftermarket exhaust that's going to open that up, that engine does sound very, very healthy. So,
which, if you want to hear that, I'll go ahead and put the link to that video in the description. You can go check out what the VN900 sounds like with the Vance and Hines exhaust on it. So check that out if you're interested in that.
Yeah.
But with that, what do you want to watch out for with this bike?
Yeah. Man, honestly, for this one, the things to look out for are the things I recommend you look out for on every bike. You want to make sure that it's been well maintained. And this is less of inspecting the motorcycle and oftentimes more inspecting the previous owner. Sometimes you just get a feel for people. Sometimes you just recognize that, hey, this guy's got 20 other pristine motorcycles in his garage that look like they've all been taken care of. That's the kind of guy that I want to buy this sort of bike from. There are a number of reports out there of people having issues with the stators on these. It's not necessarily an expensive or difficult repair, but it is one of those things to keep an eye out for. Maybe ask if you're going out and purchasing one, maybe ask the owner if they've ever had issues with the stator. That'll give you some indication as to whether or not it's been replaced, upgraded, or, if you need to be on the lookout for it.
Yeah. Back to the point about kind of looking over the bike, looking who you're dealing with. It's my understanding that a lot of how you're going to be finding these bikes for under 2,500 going to be Facebook Marketplace by and large.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've both sold and bought things on Facebook Marketplace. It's all over the place, as I'm sure a lot of y'all know.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a really good point to just say, like, look who you're buying from, and that kind of tells you that can tell you how they treat their things,
right?
Their bikes.
Right.
So
right.
It's a really great point. So we started with the bad this time.
Yeah.
Things to look out for. What makes you a little bit more excited about this bike, or something that just popped out to you?
It's very reliable, looks good. Again, just with the other bikes on this list, it's just reliable and it sounds good and it looks good. It's just a classic good cruiser, just an all around great bike. Do highway speeds easily. And it doesn't necessarily look like a Kawasaki going down the road. It just looks like, hey, there's a guy on a cool cruiser motorcycle.
There you go. Yeah. And any variations that come along with this?
Yeah, the VN900 Custom has a 21-inch front wheel that I think is just beautiful. It has a few other small cosmetic upgrades as well, but that really the thing that sticks out the most is just that front wheel. So if you kind of like more of it's not a chopper, obviously, but if you like more of a chopper-esque look, then you'll probably really enjoy the VN900. And for the money, I don't know if you're going to be able to find a better bike that has that same look and feel.
Okay, great. Okay. Let's go ahead and move on to our fourth motorcycle.
Okay. Yeah. So fourth, I would I'd look into a Roadstar, a Yamaha Roadstar. They made both a 1600cc variant and a 1700cc variant. Again, this can be one that it can be maybe tricky to find for the $2,500 mark, but depending on where you are in the country, maybe you'll have to stretch your budget a little bit. But this is probably the best looking classic cruiser that you can get for this kind of money. The engine just looks so beautiful. It really is a work of art. I think it is by far the best looking Japanese cruiser engine kind of this era.
So anything that stands out to you amongst this, and let's go ahead and tie that in with the different variations of this model of motorcycle. So what are the different variations? What kind of pops out about each of them, and what do you prefer?
They make a kind of a stripped down Roadstar with just a couple of saddlebags, but they also make a Roadstar Tour that's going to have the big windshield, it's going to have the saddlebag, backrest, a few other little accessories. Honestly, any of them are going to be fantastic. It does seem that the chrome on these models in particular tends to be quite a bit thinner than some other Yamaha bikes for whatever reason. So just something to be aware of when you go to look at one. And check all the nooks and crannies. A lot of times the pieces that appear to be chrome are obviously plastic covered chrome, or plastic with chrome on top, and they're often chipping and fading, and it can be a little bit more expensive to replace those if you're not super excited with how it looks.
Great. So this is the fourth bike, and by far now it's the biggest of the other three.
Yeah.
Is there anything you should know if you're like just getting into bikes, if you're jumping straight to a 1600, what do you need to know about that?
Yeah, so this, man, what I love about this, and even though it is a larger displacement motorcycle, it still has a low seat height. And so it's still going to feel very comfortable, very maneuverable, even for someone that may be a little bit smaller. I love that about it. The one thing that I would kind of look out for is it does seem, in the similar fashion to the VTX 1300, that the tanks do tend to rust quite a bit more often. So it's another thing. Tanks are very expensive for this. You want to make sure you check it out. Make sure that, especially if you're buying a model that's been sitting for a while, you want to make sure there's no rust in the tank. And if you do, just purchase it, bearing in mind you might have to do some repair there.
Okay. Before we move into the fifth and last one that you recommend, what bike do you avoid it at all costs? For a cruiser bike that's under $2,500, what do you want to avoid at all costs?
There's not necessarily one. Okay, the one I have in mind, I wouldn't necessarily avoid it at all costs. I would look at all the other ones before I looked at this one. And it's actually the V-Star 1100. So you think of it as just a big brother to the 650. However, there are two issues that these tend to have. The first is output shaft on the engine. Tends to strip or break or some combination of catastrophic failure, which requires the cases to be split. You don't want to do it. Extremely expensive repair. Probably would cost more to do than the entire bike cost. So I would avoid it for that reason. And then also they have issues with the starter clutch as well. And I personally know a couple of guys who customize V-Star 650s and specifically will not work on the 1100 because these two issues are so prevalent. So V-Star 1100, you can typically get it for about the same amount of money as the 650. You could buy it and it could be perfectly fine. It could be well maintained. You'll never have an issue or not. So for that reason, I recommend sticking with the other bikes we have on this list.
Great. Okay, let's move on to the final one that you
final bike. Yes. Okay, so Kawasaki VN1500. Okay, they made a lot of different variations of this. They had the VN1500 and also the VN1600. Again, just classic picture of what you think of when you think of a motorcycle. You see this bike and you think, that's a motorcycle. That's a cruiser motorcycle. Very reliable, classic looks, if that's what you're into. This is a great bike to just put some miles on. If you just want to cruise across the highway, this is going to be the ticket. The model in particular that I'm going to recommend is the Kawasaki Nomad. Comes with some color matched saddlebags that look fantastic. The engine sounds great. A lot of people will put a Vance and Hines or some other Bub exhaust or a few different brands, whatever it is, just something to open it up a little bit. It is a great sounding bike. It's very reliable. One of the things that I would look out for is the odometer screen on these do tend to fade. So if you're looking for one that has the digital odometer on there, just kind of bear that in mind. Make sure you check it before you go and purchase this bike. Make sure that's working properly if that's important to you. And if it's not, whatever. But great all-around bike. A lot of them will have also a detachable windshield. Actually, I prefer the way that it looks without the windshield, but it is nice to have the option if you plan to go on a longer highway trip.
There you go. I think you answered most of my questions. I think the only one, you mentioned that the odometer kind of tends to fade out. In that case, is there a repair? Do you just have to completely replace it? Do you do OEM, aftermarket? Whatever?
You can repair it. There's some tutorials out there on how to do it. The parts to do it are not cheap, but it does require you removing the speedometer, disassembling it. It's not necessarily a tremendously difficult repair, but unless you've been repairing things over the course of your life, it would appear to be pretty intimidating. Okay. So if you've done things like this before, be an issue maybe you don't mind tackling. But if you haven't done anything, it's probably not the first repair you'd want to do yourself.
Got it. So at that point, you just go OEM, probably, or
Yeah.
find some used car.
Try and find a good used one. It's going to be hard. It's going to cost a few $100, so just kind of bear that in mind. Make sure it's in your budget.
Okay, guys, well, that was the top 5 cruiser motorcycles that we recommend under $2,500, and one that we recommend maybe you stay away from. So thank you guys for watching this video. If you would, go ahead and subscribe to our channel for more stuff like this, and like the video, and have a great day.